So my 16.1 Compare and Contrast by Harry Baker. So the roles, so they're my four roles that I picked. So friend. So a coach can be more of a friend in individual sports compared to team sports because you spend a lot of time together and you get to know one another, resulting in a connection where the coach can be a good friend to the athlete as well as improving them. This is different for a team as it's harder for the coach to achieve that connection as there are more players and it will take a long time to get to know everyone in the same way as an individual sport. Also, a coach needs to be more careful because if they are friendlier to one player, then others could view this as biased and feel like the coach isn't being the same to everyone. Also, comparing and contrasting a coach as a friend between grassroots level and elite athlete level, a coach would be similar in both, but just at different levels. For example, they could be friendly at grassroots levels to keep the athletes' participation and carry on with the sport, as participation is key. However, they could also be less friendly and more serious if they are demonstrating and trying to convey something serious, or if they are misbehaving. This is similar to elite athlete because the coach and the athlete will understand the time and the place to where to be friendly and where to be serious. They would have a good friendship and they would be able to work together. They would be working together for so long, and they would understand each other. But still, the friendship within an elite athlete and the coach would be different in competition and training because the coach will be friendlier at training, and then at high level competition they'll be more professional. Lastly, if the game is recreational, the coach would be friendlier than if it was a competition because they're not trying to achieve anything, only to have fun. Right, so a manager. So at grassroots levels, there doesn't tend to be a manager, but this depends on the sport and the club's organisation. But if there was one, it'd probably be one of the parents of the team, which would also be the coach and the manager. However, this is different to professional levels as they would have multiple managers for different areas and one head manager oversee and run the organisation. A similarity between the coach being a manager is that they would be the same for both male and female usually. It would be a lot easier to manage individual sports compared to a team sports because you don't have to worry about multiple people, transport, accommodation because it tends to only be the coach and the athlete traveling to competition, which depends on the level of ability. But then managing team sports comes with a greater responsibility that everything is correct. So for a trainer, so the main difference for a trainer is team and individual sports because in the individual sports they can have quality one-on-one times developing skills and fitness, and they're able to clearly see where improvements are happening and they can track their progress. Contrastingly, this to team sports, it's harder for a trainer to know where everyone is working at, and it's harder for them to work with the athletes as they must watch the whole group. Also, if a trainer was to make a fitness program for an individual athlete, they could specifically tailor it to their needs, whereas if they were to make it for a team, it would be a generic program as it will take a long time to make an individual one for the whole team. Also, if the coach or athlete was um, of a different gender, they might not know exactly how hard to train as they could be working them too hard or not hard enough. Age is another factor the trainer would have to consider because different ages would be at different fitness levels, therefore the task and exercise they prescribe would be different for each person. That's why it's hard for a team because everything is generic and might overwork or underwork some certain people in the team. But a successful coach would have different programs for each members in a team. So lastly, motivator. So comparing a coach being a motivator to a team in individual sports is very similar because a successful coach will know when and how to motivate their athletes. Therefore, a coach is motivating in the same way for a team in individual sports. Also, the ability of an athlete, whether they are beginner or elite, shouldn't matter when it comes to motivation because a good coach will motivate everyone, even if the outcome is different. For example, a coach might motivate a beginner football player if they're dribbling the ball, but then they'll also motivate an elite athlete in the Football World Cup finals. However, it's harder to motivate a team compared to an individual because there is more people which will need motivating and at different levels and different times within a game, which is harder for a coach to be motivating them all the time. But then it's different for an individual sport because An effective coach will know what to say and when to enhance their athlete's performance. However, this might sometimes create too much pressure for the athlete and their performance might drop. The age of the athlete will determine what the coach will say to motivate and how they will say it, because younger children will like anything positive being said to them, but then teenagers or older people might sometimes see motivation as sarcasm and lose focus on what they're doing. So responsibilities, so I did legal obligation, professional conduct, health and safety, equal opportunities. So legal obligation, so any coach needs to be CRB, DBS checked to see if they have any previous convictions. Responsibilities will be different for team and individual sports, because in a team sports they have higher legal obligation, because the coach will need minibus training, business insurance and cover to transport a team to fixtures. This will be different for an individual sport, because obviously there's only one person and the coach, so they could have business insurance just to be safe, or if they're taking a child, have the child's parents' permission, or if they're old enough to make a decision for themselves, then they can. A coach should give advice to anyone, male or female, of any age, on nutrition, supplements, ergogenic aids and doping. A coach has a legal obligation of duty of care for everyone that they are coaching. This includes registering attendance, having records of contact details and many more. However, a coach has a higher loco parentis when working with children. A coach should be aware of the signs and symptoms of abuse for any age, specifically children. Lastly, comparing competition and training, a coach should have the same legal obligation in place to make sure everything is professional. So, right, next I did professional conduct. So every coach should conduct themselves in a professional manner despite the ability of the group. However, certain aspects of the conduct relate to grassroots and elite athletes and whether the team has training or competition. So during training, most athletes will wear clothing that will allow them to demonstrate in that, and that is appropriate. However, in elite athlete in competition in the Olympics or professional events, the appearance of the coach is key, and they would be wearing a suit or smart dress. Also, a coach will have a better knowledge and understanding if they're coaching an elite athlete compared to a beginner, as they are at a higher level. A successful coach will be prepared and punctual for every training session, reliant on the ability and skill level. Individual sports like gymnastics have a higher professional conduct than other sports, team sports, because they need to have the appropriate interaction and assisting in movements compared to basketball, where the coach can demonstrate and tell someone how to do it without touching them for assistance. So health and safety. So a successful coach will have the training qualification of health and safety. Certain individual sports like rock climbing have a higher health and safety risk and require first aid on site. Therefore, in individual sports, the coach will be looking at the athlete at all times to see if something like a hazard, and they can stop the person, whereas in team sports it's difficult for a coach to be watching every person in the group to make sure that they're being safe always. So I suppose coaches of elite athletes will really think about the health and safety and what the athlete is doing as it's their career, and if they get injured, their career would end. This is also the same for different ages, because coaches need to be aware of how children will hurt themselves, but also elderly people partaking in higher risks. And if they get injured, they could it's possibly life-threatening and take a long time to recover. When planning a successful coach will firstly make a risk assessment for the session and then consider the age and ability of the group, the space and surface, and many more. Then during a session, a coach will warm the athletes up, and this will happen no matter what the age ability is. There will also be clear instructions and an art to evaluate and adjust the risk assessment if needed. The procedure should happen in every situation for the physical preparation and recovery of the body. So lastly, equal opportunities. So at grassroots level and lower levels, the coach tends to be one of the children's parents. So when it comes to the games and the fixtures, the parents will pick their child even if they don't benefit to the team. Therefore, at lower levels, there is more injustice to equal opportunities. However, at elite level, there is more equality, because if you are talented at something, then the coaches encourage that. Coaches should give men and women the same opportunities during training and competition, but also athletes with impairment should get the same opportunities. However, this is hard sometimes for coaches as accessibility is an issue. Therefore, successful coaches will always be thinking about equality and making the session fun, and the coach should also always encourage, allow, and modify opportunities so everyone can partake. So skills, I did communication, organisation and problem solving. So communication, so it's vital in both team and individual sports to make sure that everyone knows what's happening and when, but it's especially important in team sports because there are lots of people. Therefore, the coach needs to communicate with lots of people, including the parents, officials, management, other teams. Also, at high levels like elite athletes, there might be communication with the media. During a session, a coach will use different verbal and non-verbal techniques like blowing a whistle. This would be very important in team sports that are training in big spaces with lots of people. Saying names would be common ways to communicate in individual sports, as there are only one name to say instead of a whole team. Raised voices, again, usually team sports. And if the training session is inside, the coach can change the volume for a small environment. Lastly, hand gestures. So this would be used in training or competition in big spaces, and could also be done with verbal communication. It's very effective for people with special requirements, for example, deaf people. And in sports like swimming, it can be used to show technique while they're in the water. Other forms of communication that can be used at grassroots and professional level could be a microphone at tournaments, for example. Communication is vital in training and competition. However, this would be different types for each, because during training the coach is more instructing and saying how to do something and how to complete it, and in competition the coach is communicating how to improve there and then. So there are also lots of issues with communication. For example, when there are lots of people, you can't be sure they are listening, so communication is lost. Also, if there are technical and language barriers, and lastly, the clarity of the instructions. Finally, a successful coach will have a good listening skills, and this is vital for every sport, as speaking and listening is the way to improve performance. So organisation is key for a coach, no matter what the activity, level, training or competition. A successful coach will organise before, during and after a training or competition. Organisation is probably more important in team sports than individual sports, because in team sports the coach will have to organise player into groups, and this can be done by numbers, names and many other ways. However, there are also many issues in organising in groups, because there'll be different abilities, which means that some groups will be better than other groups, and if the good people are put together, then this could put the less skilled people off. Also, gender can be an issue, because if people are put into groups, some might have all girls or all boys or more than one than the other. This might cause arguments and disagreements. Other issues in high ability teams could be that people are put into certain groups for strategies because they are the same position. Organisation into groups is less important in the elite level, because most athletes are around the same ability. At high levels there might be more organisation to do, because athletes might get sponsored, therefore there's money, and printing logos onto kit must be done and other things like that. So lastly, problem solving is definitely more common in team sports compared to individual sports, because in team sports coaches must solve issues like odd numbers, injuries, behaviour management and lack of participation. Not saying that some of them are not relevant to individual sports, but it's harder when you have a group of people. Problem solving is a key for both grassroots and elite athletes, but the problems that they solve are different to agree, because the grassroots might be about odd numbers and lack of participation, but elite athletes might be about crucial moments to win the game or race, and team strategies to beat an opponent, and most commonly player selection, because the coach will want the best team on at all times to win the race or game.